Welcome everyone to Mindset Lab, where in today's episode, we take a look at sport as an agent for social change. My name is Jameson Schultz-Franco, and I'm joined by two very active and recognized individuals in the sport world. First, co-host Dr. Jennifer Fraser, who is an award-winning educator and best-selling author on Amazon. Having been featured by the likes of the Huffington Post and the Toronto Star, Jen researches, publishes, and speaks on the impact of bullying and abuse on the brain. Jen, it's a pleasure to be co-hosting with you today.
Thank you so much, Jameson. I'd love to be here.
We're also joined today by Russ Smith. Russ is the coach and football lecturer at the University of Wolverhampton and is well known as a recipient of the UK Coaching Coach Developer of the Year Award for his work with the organization Street Games. Russ, first off, thank you for joining us today. And how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me on. And I'm looking forward to our chat with like minds and sharing the goodness that we know.
Absolutely. I think having been nationally recognized for Street Games, I'd like to start there. Having set a precedent like nationally and also worldwide for community outreach through sport. Can you speak about Street Games and the social change that has come as a result?
Yeah, so Street Games was set up as an agent of social change through sport in 2005. And the aims of the organisation really is that if you lived in an area of affluence, you're more likely to take part in physical activity, be coached, be part of a team, than you are to those peers who may live in areas of deprivation. So the social difference or injustice was kind of a big bridge or a gap. So Street Games was set up to kind of help to close the gap, shall we say. And the presence of that was something that was called doorstep sport. And doorstep sport is something that's delivered in the right place, so it's probably close to you, with the right price, so it's affordable. It might be free, but it might be a nominal cost. With the right person, which is normally someone from where you live. So in other words, a role model or someone who is attached to your area, and ultimately might have the right offer. And one of the big gaps that was kind of found in the essence at the start of the program was, well, if I'm joining a sports club where I've never played sport, I don't have the right clothes, I don't have the right equipment and facilities. So to jump straight there, it's a big thing. Whereas the right offer might be a fun way to start to play those activities and games which could link to that in the future. And kind of over the 15 years of existence of Street Games, working in that organisation also needed a readiness of workforce. So my job was to help the local guys on the ground become the best deliverers that they could be with the right offer to suit them. And I don't know how Canada works, but you've got some very good institutes, but coach and coach learning in England, dead formal and very formal. Have you got to go a certain place? It costs a lot of money. So how could we make that offer to you? And the offer really was empowering young people to take the lead. And a lot of my work was empowering that work, designing it, delivering it, and working with, a range of social sports such as diversion from crime, health inequalities, female empowerment or female programs to take the lead, plus also some work around restorative justice. So in other words, people who give back, which may have had a criminal past as an example. So my work was involved in that, predominantly in a region called the Black Country, which is in the West Midlands in England. So for those listening, people know soccer teams. So Wolverhampton Wanderers, West Bromwich Albion, that's the Black Country. And then obviously nationally, my work was to support those in and around that. I'm still involved in Street Games. It's a bit of a arm's length capacity. I still help and empower those on the ground and work in partnership with. And recently, I took up a role at the University of Wolverhampton, and it's kind of a legacy of that work because a lot of the young people who may have been in Street Games programs are now students. So how do we keep that work going and use those principles of doorstep sport for new coaches, new deliverers of social change to have those right understandings rather than sport is not equality for everyone? How do we make things equal? Is kind of the message going forward.
That's incredible. I think what you're saying and your work in general, I think it goes hand in hand with what we're aiming for with this podcast. And that's because it starts out with young people who have a challenge or a disability, like you mentioned, and that could be a variety of reasons, poverty, neglect, or abuse. And I think that's what makes your approach so unique, is that you address that challenge as an obstacle that can be overcome. When you are brought forward with, or you meet with people that are or have an obstacle in their way, how do you approach that conversation in kind of trying to change what they have experienced in their life so far?
Well, something that's really helped me as a model of research and kind of understand why it is I do what I do, from another profession, nursing, who do this quite well. Cooper and Wielden was a model they used about purpose-based mentoring. And what that kind of is all about is getting to know the person first. So rather than see what might be the book cover or something that's judgmental, if I get to know them first, I'm more likely to be able to link, make a change, engage with, and develop that person. And I think there was a professor from a Michigan university who said, if you show that you care, people will care what you know. And those kind of things come hand in hand. So whether it be, and I'll give you an example very live from kind of where I live at the moment. One organisation is called the Black Country Wellbeing Hub. They're based in an area called Dudley. But the guy who leads that is a guy called Wade Cooper. Now, Wade has been in prison. Now, he's very reflective of his past. However, he's using that to make change for the future of young people in the area. But if I didn't get to know that, I can't make a difference, because I would be, oh, I've heard about Wade, I don't know whether he's the right role model. But actually getting to know and understand how their motivations are is a simple way to build that trust relationship, to make a change and help them empower for what their outcome is. And that model was really helpful, because sometimes you just do stuff and you don't know whether it's the right thing. But when I kind of adapted and used that kind of helped. And it's called the purpose-based mentoring model. So understanding, engaging, empowering, and kind of going back to re-help as and when you need to.
There's a lot to unpack there, I feel like, and a lot of valuable information. I think Jen, with some of your work having been very relevant to understanding of self and communities, and kind of this like empathetic learning technique that Russ is speaking about. Are you able to speak about what that means to you?
Well, it's actually really interesting because there's a brilliant TED Talk. I'm not sure if you've seen it, Russ, or you, Jameson, but it's called The Neuroscience of Restorative Justice. And it's by a British individual, a neuroscientist, Dr. Dan Reisel. And he talks about how, when you take a moment and you step back and you look at the brains of people who are in prison for very, very serious crimes, once you see the brain and you look at the brain on the scan, you realize that this person has grown up as a child, usually under extremely harmful conditions, and their brain has gotten, it shows signs like, for example, an enlarged amygdala. So the child grows up in a very harmful environment, whether it's neglect or abuse or adversity, poverty, all these different forces that shape our brains. And it reacts in certain ways. So an enlarged amygdala, for example, would be quick to go to violence because the self feels so profoundly threatened all the time. So what I love about what Russ is doing is that as soon as you walk away from this idea of, oh, I'm going to tell you who you are, or I'm going to judge you, or I'm going to make you pay for the fact that you've made a mistake in your life. We all make our mistakes. By stepping away from the moral approach, he's automatically doing a more empathic approach, which is much more brain-based. We have brains wired for empathy, and they get dismantled over time. And what I see street games doing is returning coaches to their natural empathy. Their brains are, igniting back up with care as the number one cause, purpose as the number one cause, and then this kind of outreach to say, hey, what is it that I can do to support you and lead you to empower you to be your best self? So our work is completely in line, although I humbly say that because I'm such an admirer of Russ's work.
That's awesome.
I think if I could add a bit of value there. Yeah. So that's kind of the hard work that I described. But then the bit to keep it going is the kind of the magic. So imagine, as I've just described there, Wade, But there's other people in the country who are like Wade, trying to do something to give back. So the kind of community of practice stuff links and helps it make difference. So Wade, as an example, if I can get him introduced to another person, maybe in another city, doing the same sort of work, then they have their own community building now. Rather than them work in isolation and feel like the system's against me or it's kind of hard at what I'm trying to do, then there becomes a network of maybe 10, 20, 30 similar-minded individuals who can help each other, whereas I can just dip in and dip out and give them some advice, guidance, training as and when that's needed. And that's kind of the bit that gives it its legacy and longevity, because just individual stuff or parachuted stuff doesn't kind of stick for that long. Whereas when it's self-empowerment and help with others around you as a support mechanism, that's the stuff that's happened over the last 12, 15 years as part of my work.
That's incredible. Yeah. Jen, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say that that's one of the things that I noticed when I was looking at Wolverhampton University, that they have 96% career success, like their graduates landing careers. And I know that you're working now transforming your coaches. And I've read the stories about how you have certain individuals, for example, that have a cognitive impairment of some kind or a learning disability. I personally don't like that word because of my work as a teacher. I know that what we say is a disability, again, that's a big judgment. And oftentimes it's an exceptionality. The brain processes information in a completely different, really innovative way. And so what I love is to see that your university, I mean, just even if someone is going to go there, it's automatically saying, look, we're going to connect you with the right people. We're going to create networks for you. We're going to empower you to get out there and launch your life and have a career. So what's really interesting to me, Russ, is I was wondering about how it was that you developed this mindset, this belief system that you could make this kind of change. How did you get involved in street games or create it and convince government to really invest majorly in this project? I mean, in Canada right now, I think, and in America and other countries, we tend to be caught in a real downstream. Somebody makes a terrible mistake, somebody can't get into school, someone has a drug problem, whatever it is, we start to sort of deal with the crisis downstream. What you're doing is upstream preventative work, empowering people before they ever get to that place. So I'm really interested in, how did you convince people to get behind you and understanding that this was a much more effective method?
Well, essentially, you just got to look at the money, and the money often changes people's perceptions. So an example, if a young person is in our youth offending system, that will probably cost, let's say, £9,000. However, for a programme of £500, we can help them volunteer, be part of a project, be connected, and probably build some positive life choices that can prevent that from happening again. So that's kind of a social change of prevention through crime. But on the other hand, in areas of deprivation, obesity levels, risk of disease, cost to our health service, can we prevent that lower down? And a good example at the moment that's quite fresh in England, and it's very much on the political landscape, is we have something called free school meals for those families on low income. So that means during school holidays, they don't get free meals because obviously school's not on. So we have a program where they have a bursary. So that might be a voucher you use in your supermarket or something like that. But the argument at the moment is that used in the right way? So some people may use it for the wrong reasons in the supermarket, and where holiday activities could be delivered with food, with physical activity. So going back to some sort of model of preventing obesity down at the bottom will save so much more money in cost and restraint. And the prevention kind of agenda it's really big, and it's using that as what could you save. We have something that's quite new to England, and I don't know whether you have it in Canada, called social prescribing. You've ever heard of this?
I've never heard of it personally.
I haven't either.
Okay. So social prescribing, and especially in our COVID lifestyle that we're in now, mental health, could be physical impairment, whatever it may be. every time you go to your doctor, that costs a lot of money to have face-to-face time and a prescription and maybe some drugs, whatever it is you have. But a lot of that can be sorted by saying, tell you what, you don't really need to see the doctor. You don't really need a prescription. You need some positive activity, whether that be sports, whether that be community activity, whether that be talking. And this is where kind of my work aligns in to help out those groups know about this stuff. Because the example of the group I told you in Dudley, they didn't know. But they do a lot of work with young people to prevent from crime. But now they're doing a lot of work with 40 plus people who might have lost jobs, people who might be depression because of the COVID effect. But just doing simple activities of turn up and talk, box and chat, or just talk with other people. A lot of preventative through not going to the doctor. And this is called social prescribing. The monies that would have been spent on services costs to the NHS is what we call. It would be now spent less amount back in the community provisions as prevention.
I think that's a lesson that we can learn in Canada, especially. And I'm only thinking about, as a listener right now, I'm thinking about what the challenges that COVID has presented. And I'm sure, like, through community connection and kind of this restorative justice method that you and Jen have talked about, I'm thinking about how COVID has only really presented disconnect between communities in certain ways. And for example, the fact that we're doing this over Zoom, like a lot of Zoom calls and some communities don't even have access to this kind of technology. And I'm thinking about this disconnect. Are you able to speak about what COVID has presented as far as what you're doing with Wolverhampton or street games, for example?
Yeah, and in a university example, most of our students live local to our university, which is kind of why I think me working there works. We're not Loughborough, but we're University of Wolverhampton, and we're going to be the best for those young people of the Black Country. But if you think of that scale of, well, the young people seem to be very resilient, I've found, from COVID. And really, it's just a problem. I wear the mask in a shop and I wash my hands. But if we go up a little bit and we class young people as part of our government funding up to 25, those 20 to 25-year-olds, this is a big problem. There's not many job opportunities. There's not much work. So we're finding that a lot more, older young people are coming back to education because there's nothing else for them. And we're seeing a lot of issues through mental health, through confidence, through whether it be disconnection of society. So before we can even do a lesson, we're dealing with this. And I've had training, but a lot of my colleagues haven't. So what's the best way to do it and how can you do it? A one-size-fits-all model isn't the model here. It has to be very individualized and personalized to help. And an example I can give you, I've had a new student enrolled. He's 27 and had a past with criminal justice. However, through his own findings, he lost his job role within a supermarket he was working at, but now wants to give back, but was quite adamant and quite clear and said, I've been in jail. I do sometimes have bouts where I might not be on the radar. However, I'll come and talk to you about it. Now, this isn't normal for institutes of academia. It's normal to me because of where I've worked for 15 years. So these are the skills which modern day, I suppose, education is key. It's not just about the teaching now. It's about the mentoring, supporting, listening, empathy, getting to know. And it's back to those principles I spoke about earlier at Street Games, which has really prepared me for it. Because if I get to know them, I can make a difference.
Yeah, again, this it's really interesting in the research, as you would know, Russ, and Jameson, I imagine you study this type of work as well. That's completely backed up also at the elite level for sports. I mean, if you're working with professional athletes or you're working with Olympians, the research shows that the more empathic you are, the more you greet them and see them and talk to them and nurture them as individuals, not as people that are going to produce or increase your ego or get you the medals that you want to feel proud of what you do. But you see them as human beings that can suffer injury, that can become ill, that can have mental health struggles, and you nurture them and care for them and befriend them. The research is very clear that these are the people that triumph. These are the teams that win. So it never, I mean, my struggle is in trying to work with people who don't believe the research. Basically, it's like not believing science or something. They just want to believe their system, and they think that they've always done it this way. If they keep doing it this way, then somehow it'll keep them safe or justify how they behave. And I just really think we need to lean on the science. So yeah, I mean, teaching has to be an understanding that every brain that comes to you is unique. Number one, our brains are as unique as our fingerprints, but we always do this one size fits all model. So, as soon as somebody presents with a different way of processing information, we're like, whoa, this is a learning disability. What are we going to do? Well, we have to fix them essentially, with that understanding that no, this just might be a very different way of processing thinking and so on. And then also, again, going back to this empathy piece, and this is going to be a theme throughout the Mindset Lab, because empathy is the game changer, just like sports are the game changer in terms of health and well-being, mental health as well as physical health. So yeah, this idea that your mindset when your students come in is to see them, and you're showing up for them, and you're asking really much deeper questions, not how do I just pour knowledge into your heads? That's the old-fashioned model. What you're doing is saying, I can see you and I need to learn about you so I can teach you. And I think that is so really the future of education and understanding. That's a neuroscience-based model.
There's I'll give you a little story, which is very true, to kind of back up some of the things we've been saying. So flipped classroom is kind of from Maastricht University in Holland, where actually I might have the problem, but my students are going to solve it. Now, they might solve it in different ways. They might work together. They might research on their own, however they're going to do it. But that's a part of my teaching toolbox, really, that I use to flip the classroom. And back to Jen's point, so I have a student this year, which I can't really quite understand. He's left Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, to come to me in the Black Country. Now, to me, that's a bit crazy because Myrtle Beach is a bit nicer than the Black Country. However, the little comment he made the other week really backs up our chat there. So we were doing some education around how people learn in soccer coaching. And, some of my students, they're enjoying it, they're having a chat, etc., etc. And he said to me, how come you didn't make them do laps? And I went, why would I do that? Because that's what I grew up with. Because effectively, some of Jen's past work, it's very much the bully mentality. You listen to me, you run your push-ups when you're not doing it. And I kind of said to him, I said, well, they were engaged. Just because they were having a laugh doesn't mean that they weren't learning. It was just the fact of it wasn't distracting others, so I was okay with that. So getting to know them a bit more and engage them in. But it's just really interesting how he said to me, how come you didn't make them do laps? And that's just because of his upbringing in South Carolina.
Of course. Jameson, can I jump in? I've got a pressing question now.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so again, back to Mindset Lab. How is it possible, Russ, that you grew up with probably that system in sport, and instead you became a coach developer who engages your athletes in happiness and positivity and connection and social investment? Where did the moment happen that the light went on and you went, hey, I can do something differently? Because what we're really excited about is looking at how do we change mindset, our own mindset, if it's holding us back and we believe lots of negative things about ourselves, or we've been trained in a very, many people are trained in a bullying model. It's all they know. So to your point about this student, they don't know that there's another way. And so how did it happen for you that you made this switch?
Easy. So I know this because I've been asked it before. So I used to play soccer, and I used to play soccer to a level where We call it semi-professional. So in other words, you might get some payment for playing. And we had two coaches. Coach number one would make us run until we were sick because he thought that was good. And coach number two would have a chat with me about my week. Now I knew that coach number two was where I wanted to be, because coach number one really didn't have my trust, my respect, or anything else. And like Canada, it's a very small percentage of people that will become a professional athlete. So I kind of knew I'm not going to be a professional athlete, but I really like sports and I really like coaching. I was, volunteering, doing things. But I always wanted to be coach number two. And he's a guy called Ian Parks. And what I learned from that was that I can shout, I can make laps, I can give punishments, but it didn't work for me. The other way did. And that's always been kind of my coach philosophy, really. If I understand the person, I can help the person. And I still see Ian Parks. And I haven't really told him, that story there of the impact of it. But I always tell him about, because he's been on my courses now. It's crazy. So I kind of said to the impact of how you talk to people was massive, and that was something that switched the light bulb for me. And I've come across, even when I worked in a school, maybe before my street games time, and I was kind of a like PE teacher type thing. And we had another member of staff, and he would judge whether he got on with you or not if you could run 800 meters without stopping. So I always remember that, because if you're an 11-year-old going to secondary school in England, if you can't run 800 meters, he will not like you, and you will not be in those groups for PE. Whereas myself, and there was another member of staff called Claire, well, we used to have them turn them away because there was that much going on. We'd put music on, we'd do dance things, we'd play soccer with the lights flashing, all sorts of stuff, because we weren't really bothered if you were good. We were bothered that you came. And the measure of success for us was always, do the kids want to go home? And if they don't, we've done a good job. Whereas the other staff member was, can they run 800 meters without stopping? If they can't, don't want to know.
Oh, that just pains me so much. The Dr. John Rady's book was a real eye-opener for me. His book is called Spark. And he writes about, first of all, that he calls it the revolutionary impact of exercise on the brain, basically. But one story totally is the same kind of approach that you're talking about, where there's a school in Illinois, a school district actually, and instead of teaching sport, like, oh, you have to learn all the rules to football, or oh, you have to learn all the rules to gymnastics, whatever it is, and then I'm gonna assess you and measure you and mark you on that. They get their marks for effort. So the kids that participate in these fitness programs, they're only competing against themselves, and they're only learning what they want to learn. So they're given all kinds of options. You want to do yoga? Amazing. You want to do like stationary bicycle or the rowing or whatever it is you want to do, we're going to make that happen. Very street games model. And what they found was that really amazed the teachers was they use heart monitors. So instead of using their own judgment or their own mindset to assess who's successful and who's not in terms of their fitness levels, they actually allow the unique child to have their own unique heart situation and improve and so on. And one of the stories was they saw these two girls running. So Dr. John Rady went and observed this program. These two girls were doing laps, and when they arrived, the heart monitor showed that even though it looked like they were running kind of slow and they were laughing and talking and so on, they were at a level that was equivalent to a high level elite athlete. So for their unique bodies and physique, they were actually doing a brilliant workout. And this really opened up the eyes of these teachers. And the other really exciting thing about this school in Illinois, this school district, is the students, what they wanted to see is, oh, if we give them all this time to do fitness, won't it impact their academics? They won't be having all that knowledge poured into their brains. Well, they ended up being number 6 in the world in a science test. No, it was number 6 in mathematics and number 1 in science across like Korea, China, the world in terms of these top level students. So it goes to show you exercise, happiness, fitness, support, confidence, these things, they make you a far better student because they totally make your brain healthy. So, I mean, this is, yeah, I love that story of the two coaches and then this, I mean, it's misguided, but it really does so much damage. This is why, we launched this podcast and we want to talk about it. It's a very tense subject and people get upset and they're very defensive, and fair enough. But I still think we have to have this conversation.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Russ. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so the legacy of some of that stuff is the street games model is training coaches on multi-skills, not specific sport skills. So in other words, that's the job of the clubs. So if you get to a point where you think, you know what, I want to maybe play for a team, no problems. But when it's about having fun, learning new skills, communication, relationships, the multi-skills approach is what was adopted there. And that's something that continues with how coaches are therefore trained, especially young people. And that's the methodology that helps out with probably a more active nation. And our government strategy in England is around Sport England strategy of active nation. So it doesn't matter whether you're in a professional club or you play cricket twice a week or whatever it is, but you're measured then on how many minutes per week your heart beats a bit quicker. So as an adult, we have a bench line, which is really low, but can your heart beat a bit quicker for an hour a week? Now, if you think that's really low, but there's many adults who don't even meet this. So there's different guides and means that can help out you to get your heart beating a bit quicker. So it's not the recognizing that you can play 5 sports, you can do a triathlon, etc., etc. Now it might be, do you walk an extra bus stop? Do you cycle to school? Could be, do you garden? Do you carry your shopping? A varying things, all classes for moderate. Whereas before, these things was just, no, you don't play sport. You're not in a tennis club. You're not wearing white. And that used to be the measure. And the measure now is all about physical activity. And it doesn't matter what that looks like. How do you have your heart beating for an extra hour a week for adults? And it's 30 minutes a day for children.
I'm thinking about your approach based on what both of you have said and kind of fostering more of a love for sport and participation. And one of the things that I was reading up about your program, let me clarify the name of it, but the Coach Mate Connector program, Russ. And that's kind of like talking about you can speak to it better than I can, but my question was more about coaches that are wanting to get involved in the game and having, if they have or have not participated in street games or have been fostered a love for this sport at a lower level. How do you get coaches, whether they be in the UK or Canada, how do you get coaches to foster a love further with the kids?
So the program you speak about there, so for 2 years, kind of my work from street games changed to the university kind of December time. So for the previous 2 years, my work was a program called Coach Mate Connectors. So I'll just give listeners a description of that is, if you're a young person, there's so many barriers to become a coach. How much is it going to cost? It's probably the biggest one. How much time? And I've got to travel somewhere to get that qualification or to do it. So the program was kind of developed to say, do you know what? There'd be a coach mate or a coach mate connector by where you live who will come to you, take that qualification, strip it down, and work with you where you're coaching. So the deal was you got to be volunteering or coaching somewhere. That comes from them. And then you meet me or whoever. And over a period of time, we will help you to achieve that. And ultimately, that really helped people who are never on any register to become a coach. So one example, one of my coach mates, I worked with a girl called Kamal. So Kamal, maybe like Canada, you've had an influx over the last 10 years of refugees or asylum seekers. And Kamal was from Afghanistan. Now, statistics in England for UK coaching say if I'm a female, if I'm Asian and I have a disability, I'm not even on your statistics to become a coach. But meeting Kamal in an education setting And then getting her to volunteer at an organisation called Benson Community meant that we'd done the first bit, but the next bit was to make that stick. So the coach mate working with someone for over a period of 6 months or more. And with Kamal, it was kind of over 30 hours of work, but stripping things down. So it might have been talking about, do you understand how children learn? Now, Kamal, probably not. So let's do a little bit together with the kids you're working with. You can reflect on it. We'll have a conversation. But that's one task that's then done of the qualification to become a coach, just evidenced in a different way. And that then really helps coaches to think, well, rather than me just turn up to a course and get a tick, can I embed it? Can I reflect upon the life experiences I've had and then empower those young people to understand that I'm there for them? So I'm there for the person and they're there for the kids. And that model worked really well. And that's ultimately one of the reasons why I got that accolade for how to strip that down and work within communities, because, you know, it's really hard to do so because constraints such as if I want to be a coach, for an example, in soccer, well, I need £150. I need to be with a club that has rules and has some sort of monies to do that. I probably have to give up 4.5 days of my time somewhere to do that training. And then, even if I get past all those barriers, I need the right equipment plus some insurance to do so. So by breaking all that down and making it in a different way, that's what helped to get the outcomes and now has a legacy of people who would never be a coach, who are now helping young people in areas which probably need more physical and positive activities than ever.
Think of how much you're tailoring these programs to the individual. And I think that the current model and having you spoken about your role model that you had under the two coaches and how you're kind of sharing that philosophy with a bunch of people, it's kind of shaping a generation of people who are self-aware and empathetic in a sports setting. When I think about the opposite and they're not necessarily being a self-awareness, and if people currently operate under like a negative coaching situation, do you believe that there's hope for them to kind of get out of that without having a role model in their coaching position?
Yeah, so I also work in soccer as part of where I live too. And yeah, so we have a community of practice and we define people who are on the bus or people who haven't got a ticket yet. And the people who haven't bought their ticket yet is what you're describing there. Now, rather than say, we're not going to work with them ever, they're not on the bus. Wrong approach, because really I just don't know them well enough. So probably they're modelling what they've come across, or there is a rationale or a reason why. If we can find that out, we can help that. And a lot of coaches within I suppose an organised setting, the kind of mirror behaviours that they may have had when they were a child or maybe when they played. B, it's what I see on the TV, the Premier League, they shout. So why can't I shout? Or C, they might go to Wolverhampton Wanderers or West Bromwich Albion where people pay £25, £30 a week and shout what they want. So they mirror those sorts of behaviours because they just don't know the other bit. So rather than cascade them to say, no, there's the naughty corner, they just haven't got a ticket yet. So how can we persuade that? And we do that through positivity, really. So a lot of work in this area has kind of been catching you in rather than catching you out, because most sports will have some sort of compliance-based tick sheet. Whereas if we can go, oh, do you know what? The weekend I've just saw a coach who gave his kids biscuits and high fives, and we'll make a really good thing about that on social media and share it with other people, because actually that's the behaviours that kids need, rather than going, oh, with the soccer police, so-and-so was making them do laps or press ups or whatever. So, making the positivity kind of changes the mindset of those who haven't yet bought their ticket.
I like that analogy a lot. I'm seeing you nod your head a lot, Jen. Do you want to speak to that?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's in the work that I do, it's a struggle because Well, I mean, so what you're describing to me, Russ, the way that I try and think of it in my own work, and it's what I've been working on in the book I've been writing, I just say that what we have to do is walk away from the bullying and abuse paradigm or framework altogether. So if you have a coach, for example, or a teacher or a parent who is defaulting to really destructive behaviors, just as you're describing, they don't have their ticket yet, they don't get it, they, for whatever reason, do you use a bullying model to change them? Do you use blaming? Do you use shaming, calling them out? Or do you ostracize them? No, you can't be a part of the group. You can't ever get on the bus. We won't let you. So what I've decided in my work, and I've been working on this for years, it's taken me a long time to get to this place, but the research really supports exactly what you said, which is the only way I think we can ever really make change is by walking away from bullying and abuse framework altogether, and instead replacing it with empathy and physical exercise, because we know it reduces stress and strain and all kinds of negative behaviors and mental health issues. So literally we put sports in there, exercise, fitness, empathy, all the things that you do and talk about compassion ultimately, to take empathy beyond just, I feel this, I see you, I relate to you, and now I'm going to do something about it. I'm actually going to create a program. I'm going to work with you. I'm going to always be there. These are the pillars that are really going to make transformative change. And I mean, that's why your program is so important. That's why you get the kinds of awards and attention you do, because you've walked out of the bullying and abuse paradigm altogether, even with people that are struggling to join you. And to my mind, this is why we wanted to kick off this whole mindset lab with you, is because you're doing out in the world what many of us are aspiring to. And you can be just an amazing model for us of, it's not impossible. It can be done. And that I just basically feel huge gratitude to you. I think you're a real leader in this field. And if you can do it, then all of us can do it. And I think it's the way in which sports and education really have to change if we want to change the statistics that we have right now on our young people, which they're pretty upsetting. And COVID is really shining a spotlight even more on how much young people are suffering. And it's up to us as adults and, young people like Jameson and his group that are working on this podcast to start to say, there is another way.
Well, there's a group who I've worked with for 5 years called Benson Community. So they're a charitable organisation. They're based in probably the toughest part of the Black Country. So deprivation scale, top. And the reason why they're so successful is they don't call it coaching. They call it for the community, by the community. So when, let's say, a national governing body or an NGO or whatever it is turn up and go, you're doing tennis, you need these rules and these things. And they go, we're not. We're just doing for the community, by the community. So they don't affiliate to the organisations of sporting practice and rules. And the one thing that they're really good at, and I suppose it's by no accident, is the guy who heads it all up, Paul, his name is Paul Landucci. He used to work in mental health. And his approach is, if you come to me, I can help you. I'm not going to go to you first, though. You need to meet me halfway. And if you meet me halfway, we can do something. Now, the impact of these guys is massive. And what I mean by that is nobody gets paid. They have 800-ish on average young people a week. And they've helped to reduce youth crime in an area called Smethwick, which is a town, by 74% when their activities are on. Today, they'll have 60 young people with food, with positive activities and volunteers in where they do this, place called Hadley Stadium. Now, I don't know how they do it, but I've witnessed it for 5 years and I learned from it. And the reason why I think they're so good is because none of them are traditional sport pathway people. They're people. Paul from mental health, his daughter Laura, she used to suffer with anxiety. Errol, who helps out to do that provision, He's very much all about giving young people a chance who might be from kind of bumpy pathways and pasts, and other volunteers. And I kind of forward my students to say, you need a week at Benson Community. Before you have your aspirations of working at Wolverhampton Wanderers, can you do Benson Community? Because if you can, you're going to be a good coach. And these guys are amazing. And everything that kind of we summarised in here is for the community, by the community. And it's all done in that mechanism of fun, engaging, safe, fun practice, not sport.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially, Jameson's an athlete, he's a cricket player and plays lots of sports and is in this sport media program. But I think this idea that if you can't be a professional athlete, there's a million different careers associated with sport because it's so loved in our culture and all over the world, obviously. But it's like another flipped classroom. Instead of making sport the thing that we're all focused on and obsessed with, why not make it the people? And as soon as you do that, then sport can be anything you want it to be. It can be a force for positive change. And I want to say the negative, flip it, what you just said. One of the things that really struck me when I was reading, it was a book about neuroscience by Dr. Lawrence Steinberg, and he was talking about the fact that 70% of prisoners in California in the prison system are foster kids. There's the answer right there. It's like, yeah, you are likely to follow a bumpy path or end up in the criminal justice system if you have been put through hell, or adversity is what the research is the word that they use, as a child. It's just a fact. We know this. So why wouldn't we rehabilitate? Why wouldn't we forget the whole prison system together, unless it's a very dangerous person that we need to somehow work with in a very contained space? This is what Dr. Dan Reisel works on. He's like, why are prisons like 19th century places when we have 21st century knowledge about health and well-being and mental health and what adversity does to our kids? They need a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance until we get them healthy and well again. And I mean, that's where we save tons of our government money and funding as well. So I love this idea of really what you've done, and what this conversation has been about is you are just turning on its head or flipping all of these entrenched belief systems and having incredible success by doing it. So again, what a total inspiration for all of us.
Well, I think to answer Jameson's point before about how do you get government to fund this sort of stuff? Well, if I go back to Benson Community, when they've helped to reduce youth crime by 74%, imagine that how much cost that goes on the police. But for a fraction of that, they can do X. And what we've found is the shift of change in the landscape of sport is organised sport now is classed as retained. So it's going to happen anyway. People will join a club, people pay a membership. Now, some might be from lower economic situations, some might be, that's going to happen. But the stuff below it, sport for good, is kind of how it's categorised now, and that's kind of down to street games work over the years. They can come to people with data, funders, to say, we have X amount of young people or refugees, whatever it might be, and they're already engaged with us, but you don't engage with them. So if you invest in us a little bit, we'll share that data, those case stories, those studies, those shared learnings of how it can work, and you can share that wider. And that's kind of what's happened in our platform over the last 10, 15 years. Rather than sport being for those taking part to do more, for those underneath that who haven't taken part or found the right offer yet, to have something that's local to them that can be the start or the stepping stones into what's next. And that's how funding has kind of helped those programs, but probably saved a lot. And in the Benson example, I got some of the students to do a relevant savings on society investment kind of piece of work on them. And just in the town of Smethwick, so Smethwick's probably a population of 150,000 people. So they saved society per year nearly £300,000 based on the work that they do. But remember, all volunteers and no one gets paid. So that's where the value is.
My brain's kind of firing on all cylinders right now with both of your conversation. I'm not going to lie. I'm just being cognizant of time at the moment, and I'm thinking that if I just ask you guys one last question that if you can both answer, for an individual at kind of the end of it all, for an individual, if you're looking to give advice to them and they're in a program, whether they're a younger coach, a younger athlete, and they're trying to get out of whatever system they're in, either of you have any advice for people who are trying to get out of their system?
Jameson, define system. Do you mean they're maybe on negative pathways or their system of learning to be a coach?
I'm honestly, I guess the question is more about mindset. I'm thinking about how do you pose the question or how do you give advice to younger individuals who are looking to change their mindset about sports if they've had previous negative experiences?
Okay. So the easiest thing I would probably say is you tend to get those people who want to be a PE teacher or be a coach because they were probably good at it at school, or they got on with the coach or the deliverer or the teacher who likes sport as well. So for those guys, I asked them to look at who's not here. And what that means is if everyone here is like you, what amount of the population is not doing stuff because everyone's like you? So how can we engage more, but not through the full rules pelt that you go with? What about those that aren't here? How can you adapt? How can you facilitate? How can you engage and empower through just adapting slightly what works for you? Because if everyone who likes sport plays sport, brilliant, but there's a whole load of population who aren't there. And then that's a whole load of obesity, mental health problems, possible access into crime and negative behaviours. So how can we tweak that? And it's all about knowing that person, getting to know, engaging, and being flexible to that delivery. Your one size fits all doesn't have to work everywhere.
It's the same thing in the classroom. Teachers really need to learn that, we go into a subject and we teach it because we're really good at it. So for example, I went into literature because I'm just naturally, that's how my brain is. It's what I love. I'm really good at it. I am a disaster at science and math. I mean, I don't think that part of my brain actually was placed in me when I came into the world. It's just missing, really missing. So of course I don't teach math and science, and I would never be put into that situation. So let's go back to this idea of flipping again. You have to understand that a child in your classroom, a child in the gym with you while you're coaching or teaching PE, that might not be a strength for them. It's not a natural, innate part of who they are, and it's going to make them automatically feel self-conscious and worried, and it's going to be a challenge and a struggle. But that is the greatest place to catch a learner. That's where you really, by just as you say, Russ, if you relate to the learner and you open your brain up to the idea that their brain is unique and different, how can you enhance so that it comes alive for them, so they get ignited, so they believe in themselves? Those are the only things that really matter, whether it's an academic classroom or it's the gym. And so, I mean, I think that's probably, I know, Jameson, we can't just talk all day long, although we would like to talk to Russ all day long. Obviously, we do need to sign off and end, but I think that's a great place to end on. Basically, what we know about mindset, whether it's in research or in practice, we know that all mindsets can change. You can change from being a negative coach who was raised that way and trained that way. You can change from being someone who believes that the only path for you from the family background you have or your poverty situation is by going against the justice system and committing crime. No, you can be anything you want. And whether that's on the inside, that from a neuroscience point of view, we know that we can change our brains. We have neuroplasticity. Whatever it is we put into practice is who we are and how we end up in our lives. And once we understand that role of the brain to change, sky's the limit. We have unlimited potential. These young people that you work with, Russ, you're teaching them they could be coaches if they want, even though everything has told them up until this point, no, you can't. You prove with your work every single day, yes, you can. So thank you so much for being with us and sharing your knowledge and the incredibly important work you do.
One last thing to help that. And the education of any coach, whether they be young, old, whatever it is, I always ask them, what's your measure of success? So how do you know you've done a good job? And most of them might say, I won a medal, trophy, whatever it might be. So I'll go, okay. So your percentage chance of making a professional athlete might be minuscule. A little bit higher for winning a trophy, something like that. But you've got 100% chance to make a better British citizen. Someone who's respectful, someone who listens, someone who's healthy, someone who's happy, who can communicate and work with others. Think about now what your measure of success is. And that ultimately, I've got a lot of coaches who are not yet on the bus go, never thought about that.
Well, that's an example of changing a mindset right there. What a beautiful example to end on. Bing, just change the mindset.
Yeah. Russ, thank you so much for bringing your lived experience and your work as well in the UK. I think there's a lot of lessons that personally, at least, I'm taking away from everything that you've said. Thank you so much for joining us.
When COVID's over, feel free to visit. I'm more than happy to facilitate because we like cricket in Smethwick.
You can catch me there then. You can definitely catch me there. Yeah. Amazing. So thank you so much, Russ Smith. Next week, we're going to be shifting our conversation from mental health to brain health and speaking about neuroplasticity and healing solutions. Thank you for joining us on the Mindset Lab.